Okay, well, Sam, I'm going to call you up here now to go ahead and start your program. You can read all about it, Sam, in the program. Like I said, I don't get into all the bios because I don't want to cut into the time. But Sam's going to talk a little bit about the collections that the state has regarding 1715. Oh, by the way, hey, rule number 1, radios, phones, off. Okay, don't forget to turn your phones off if you don't mind. I'm going to turn mine off too. Okay, read it.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, as Ben said, my name is Sam Wilford, and I'm the Executive Director of the Museum of Florida History since November last year. Prior to that, I supervised State of Florida's archaeological collections, which obviously comprises of material donated to the state primarily from the salvage contracts since the 1960s. So I know there's a lot of original research being presented today and things like that, and I was kind of scratching my head about what I could talk about for an hour and a half. I'm not going to talk for an hour and a half, I don't think. I think we'll leave some time for questions and things like that. And what I thought I'd do is give you a really high-level overview of what the Department of State has in terms of its collections, give you some numbers, show you some artifacts, and then just leave it open for questions for questions and answers, things like that. So, first of all, kind of like a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today. I'll give you a very quick overview of what the Florida Department of State is and what we do. I'll discuss the Museum of Florida History, which is within the Florida Department of State. Talk about archaeological collections, which are managed by the Bureau of Archaeological Research. Discuss specifically, of course, platefully collections held by the Bureau. And then talk about a little bit about the Anchorage donation that Mel received earlier. The Florida Department of State is a little bit unusual for a Department of State, the fact that we have museums and collections within the Department of State. States like California, which is a similar size collections, they're all managed by the Park Service, but we're just within the Department of State. And I think part of that actually is because of plate fleet. Since really early on in the 1960s, plate fleet played a major role for the Florida Department of State. So that's one of the reasons why we maintain our archaeological collections is because of those materials recovered from 1715 primarily. Secretary Cole Bird is our current Secretary of State, but he is also the state's Chief Elections Officer, as well as the Chief Cultural Officer. He wears many, many hats. And so we have an eclectic arrangement of different divisions within the Department of State, ranging from corporations that make sure that businesses are filing correctly for the state of Florida, libraries and informational services, which is the state archives, as well as the state library. We have obviously the Division of Elections, the Division of Administrative Services, which oversees the management of the Department of State, Division of Arts and Culture, which maintain cultural grants, as well as an art collection and a folklife collection, and then the Division of Historical Resources, which is what I'm part of, and they manage cultural resources across the state of Florida. So the Division of Historical Resources, our Division Director and State Historic Preservation Officer is Alyssa Lotane, and so she oversees 3 different bureaus within the division, as well as a separate Historic Cemeteries and Human Remains program. The Bureau of Historic Preservation, they maintain something called the Florida Master Site File, and you may have seen this if you're looking at anything 1715 related. Site file code, so 8SL for St. Lucie County, 17 for example for Douglas Beach, 8IR 19 is another one you'll see quite regularly. So they maintain a database of all cultural resources that they're found across the states, and that's ranging from archaeological sites all the way through to bridges, standing buildings, historic districts and things like that. So the state maintain this database that people can access and look at for resources in their communities. Historic preservation also maintains federal compliance to projects, so if there's any road construction or anything like that that is underway at the state level, that has to go through a compliance process. There has to be a cultural resource survey, and so the Bureau of Historic Preservation oversees that compliance and making sure that they're correctly reported and things like that. Bureau of Historical Museums is what I'm part of. It comprises of 3 museums, Mission San Luis, which is a living history museum in Tallahassee. It's the site of a Spanish mission in the late 1500s. And then we have the Grove Museum, which is also known as the Cole Collins House. It was the home of one of Florida's first territorial governors, Richard Keith Cole. And then it was later the home of Governor Leroy Collins, and briefly served as the governor's mansion as well. And then there's the Museum of Florida History, which is I'm the director of, and we'll talk about a little bit tonight. We have the Bureau of Archaeological Research, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So they are responsible for archaeological resources on state land and in state sovereignty submerged land. So what we mean by that is things like state parks, Capitol building, as well as sovereignty submerged lands, anything navigable waterways in Florida, technically fall under the jurisdiction of the states. And then we have the Historic Cemeteries and Human Remains Program. Essentially in Florida statute, what it allows the state archaeologists to do is take jurisdiction of human remains that are found anywhere in Florida, apart from federal property. And so this is anyone 75 years or more deceased. And this is happening a lot, obviously, because Florida is continuously developing. There's lots of development impacting archaeological sites in Florida. And so there are human remains being discovered. And so we work very closely with the Florida tribes to make sure that we can repatriate and rebury those remains. So what does the Department of State actually have in terms of collections? Well, I briefly mentioned the state archives and libraries, so they're the central repository for anything to do with state governments. They have a huge collection of governmental records. That includes management of salvage contracts and things by the earlier Board of Antiquities all the way through to modern day. They maintain a huge collection that you're free to access, and I highly recommend checking out the website. We've got a good library. They also maintain private manuscript collections as well as the Florida Photographic Collection. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with Florida Memory. Florida Memory is a great resource. It's a digital resource. They're digitizing documents, maps, and photographs, and you can access them free online. So definitely search for Florida Memory online. Division of Arts and Culture, they maintain the state's art collections, and these are mainly going on exhibit in state buildings. So if you see a nice painting on it in some sort of office, it's probably on loan for the Division of Arts and Culture. They also have the Florida Folklife collection, so the state does have a state folklorist who makes sure that they are recording folklore that's particularly pertinent to Florida. They currently have a veterans program underway currently. They're recording the experiences of some of the last surviving veterans of World War II, for example, and they're maintaining digital archival records. As mentioned, we have museums. We actually have 4 museums that maintain separate collections, all within the Department of State, and then obviously we have the Bureau of Archaeological Research that maintains the state's archaeological collections. But why does the Department of State have this material, or specifically the Division of Historical Resources? It's because of Florida statutes, Florida law. So 267 Florida statute is the overarching law of the Division of Historical Resources. It instructs the division to be creative and gives its kind of mission and aim. And so part of that section 71 of Florida statute, instructs the division to open a museum, to maintain a museum, specifically the Museum of Florida History. And then also 267115 instructs the division to maintain historical and archaeological collections for the interest of the public, and to teach about history of government and the different cultures that we have to Florida. So, the Museum of Florida History. The Museum of Florida History has been open since 1977. It was part of the reason why the R.A. Gray building in Tallahassee was constructed, was because of the museum. Its main mission, our main mission, is to collect, preserve, and exhibit and interpret the material record of human cultures in Florida. And so this is through artifacts, historic documents, exhibits, educational outreach events, things like that. The museum is designated as the State History Museum, and so we are in law designated as that. That main aim is to teach the history of the entire state, not just Leon County and Tallahassee. The gallery is about 30,000 square feet, if any of you have been, and we were accredited by the American Association of Museums since 1986, and I'm pleased to say that, in fact, in November last year, we were re-accredited. We gained our re-accreditation after that process. The museum has 2 subset museums underneath us too. So we have Union Bank Museum, which is probably Florida's oldest surviving bank building. It was built in 1841. Originally as a planters' bank, so a lot of the early planters that moved to Tallahassee wanted somewhere to put their money. They were really influential people in terms of early state and territorial government. And so in 1841 the bank opened. Because of poor financial practices, there was obviously no financial regulations at that time. The bank quickly folded. And interestingly enough, after the Civil War, after emancipation, Union Bank was home to the National Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company, which is an interesting kind of dichotomy. That eventually folded too, and then Union Bank was used a whole host of different things, from hairdressers, a dance studio, there was a shoe factory, a bakery, and it's a really tiny building. It's very, very small. It's a really interesting history. In 2023, the Department of State venerated the property, and in 2024, we reopened it as a museum so people can go in there. And if you're in Tallahassee, I highly recommend visiting it. It's very small. It might take about 20 minutes to go through the entire thing, but it's worth a visit. And what's interesting about Union Bank is it was moved. So in its original location in the 1980s, the city was going to demolish it. And so there was a big citizens push for people to save Union Bank, and it was moved to its current location, which is opposite the Capitol building now. So really interesting, tiny building that's had a really interesting history. The Nut House Museum, this one was built in a similar time period, about 1843, likely by George Proctor, who was a free black builder. In the Civil War, after the Civil War, it was the headquarters of General McCook, who oversaw Florida's surrender to the Confederacy, and then later it's where the Emancipation Proclamation was read for the local area. In 1883, it was the home of a local prominent physician, Dr. George Benton, and then in 1928, it was purchased by the Knott family, who were a significant family for Florida politics, and they lived in the home until about 1985. The home was then donated as a museum. It opened in 1992. It was transferred to the Museum of Florida in 1998. You're going to see this as a continuous theme. The museum is currently closed for renovation due to lead abatement of historic properties, which we're doing for every single historic property the division maintains. And we're also going to be doing some upgrades to life safety there too, so it's currently not open for people to visit. What about the museum? So the museum has a very large eclectic collection. So the state has been collecting objects since the early 1910s. So the Florida Geological Survey, I think they were originally set out to look for phosphate in Florida. They went around the state, and lo and behold, they're picking up archaeological artifacts as well as things like fossilized mammals, bones, and things like that. And so the state started an official collection, probably like 1970, something like that. It slowly became a formalized process, and so you see the establishment of like a state archaeologist, and then a state archaeologist's office, and a formalized collection sometime in the 1930s, 1940s. Nowadays, we have, the Department of State holds most of the collections that were originally at the Museum of Gainesville. So the Museum of Gainesville used to be the State Museum, the State History Museum. In the 1980s, they shifted to more of a focus on natural history, and so their collections were moved to the Museum of Florida History. So about 22,000 objects came to us from the State History Museum. And this is things from tiny souvenir spoons through to model like cars. We have a tin camper. We have a huge array of different types of materials and collections. We have about 47,000 objects, as I say, an eclectic mix of material, mainly from the 19th century to modern day, from artifacts to historic documents to paintings, historic dress costumes, and things like that. We adhere to the American Association of Museum Standards, so we have very high professional standards. We have our own collections policies and strategies, and we utilize, obviously, a collections management system to manage those collections. And I want to highlight a couple of things in the museum that I thought might be relevant to us today. One of them, the museum has one of the largest, probably the largest public collection of citrus crate labels. So obviously citrus is a huge industry for Florida. It was obviously significant for Indian River County as well. Now I was looking through our index last week and was trying to find something that's relevant for us today. We have two treasure-themed labels today. We have Chest of Gold to You, which is Reed and Reed shippers, which were based out in St. Petersburg in the 1940s and 1950s. And interestingly enough, these actually made gift boxes in the shape of treasure chests of citrus, which I think is quite interesting. And so they would sell them across the state. And then Gasparilla, obviously, Gasparilla Band, they were based out of Winter Haven in the 1930s, 1940s, again, shipping crates of citrus across the United States. Then one more object I wanted to show, briefly talk about, is this City of St. Augustine powder horn. So a powder horn is used for loading your musket with gunpowder, and so you wear it on your belt. And usually, these are ubiquitous objects everyone had. If you're going hunting or if you're a military soldier, you have a powder horn. What's interesting enough is a lot of these are engraved. So they're probably engraved because you're a gentleman, and you like to go hunting, and you also want to show off your status and your wealth. And so this particular example is interesting because it shows City of St. Augustine around the time of 1765. And some of the historic structures that are like on the map are still relevant today. And it also shows something called the Treaty of Picolata, which was in November of 1765 between the English and what at the time was the Creek Confederacy, the Native Americans. And so It's interesting we put this on a powder horn. We don't know who owned this powder horn, unfortunately. It was donated to the museum in the 1980s. What's interesting, though, is almost an exact copy of this powder horn is actually in the Royal Ontario Museum in Canada, which shows the same treated piccolata. And it was actually recovered from the body of a sepoy during the Indian Mutiny in 1857. So it's really interesting to think, what's the powder horn, showcasing the treaty piccolata and St. Augustine doing in India during the Indian Mutiny? Who knows? We don't know, but it may have been lost in a game of cards, it may have been purchased, it may have been looted, we don't know. It's just a really interesting object. And so this object will actually be on exhibit this Friday in the State Capitol building. We're doing an exhibit focusing on the 14th colony as part of the US 250 celebration. So as part of America 250 FL, we're doing an exhibit in the State Capitol building. If you're in Tallahassee and you'd like to see the exhibit, please do send me an email. I'll try and give you a tour of it, or at least show you where it is for people to see it. So definitely check that out. The museum also makes sure that we disseminate as much as we can of the artifacts and documents we have in our collection. So we do a very active loan program. We provide loans of artifacts free of charge across the state and across the US and the world. We try and base what artifacts are available based on the suitability of the venue. So what kind of climate control they have, security and things will guide the kind of material that we can loan to that certain museum. And obviously they're available insurance as well. We have about 22 exhibit loans currently across the US, with about 200 objects ranging from tiny material like badges and pins through to pianos. We have an exhibit across the country. We also do have the traveling exhibit program, our TREX program. We provide pre-made curated exhibits focused on Florida themes for a rental fee. Usually about 3 months at a time. They're affordable, and we try and tailor it to the kind of size of the venue the exhibits that we have. And they're really popular. We have about 21 traveling shows that are available. They range from things like alligators. We have a really popular show on alligators, Florida movie posters, all the way through to civil rights. The future of the museum. So unfortunately the museum was closed in 2022 due to construction of the RA Gray building. So one of the problems with Florida is if you build something on the ground, we have a lot of rain, there's a lot of water that needs to go somewhere. And unfortunately, historically we've had issues with water intrusion into the basement. So we've had intrusive water impacting exhibits we've had. And so the decision was made to close the museum in 2022 while the RA Gray building is under construction for hopefully finally fixing the water intrusion issue that we have in the museum. And so we took this opportunity to redesign and redevelop the museum, because this is the only time, hopefully in our lifetime, the museum will close this time since 1960. So 2024, Helicola Design were contracted to help us design a master plan for essentially what we would like to see as a redesign for the Museum of Florida History. And this includes essentially one of the first full redesigns of the museum since 49 years ago, about 30,000 square feet. And so that master plan was created and complete. And I'm pleased to say that in the proposed governor's budget for this year, Governor DeSantis has asked for $10 million to help fund essentially the redevelopment of the museum, to help it complete and to open. So fingers crossed we can get that money in the budget this year. And so I know a lot of people will probably ask me, well, when's the museum opening? I can tell you that I can tell you that I will have a good idea in July of this year when we can give a date for that. And specifically for our interest here, the Plate Fleet exhibit will be redesigned as part of this redesign of the museum. And we're very excited to work with 1715 Fleet Society to help with input and things like that for the artifacts that stay hold. I think it's fantastic to eke some of those personal stories out of the artifacts that we have, and that's something the public really do enjoy. So definitely get in contact with the Fleet Society when we're ready to start working on these exhibits. All right, the state's archaeological collections. So the state's archaeological collections, as I said, are managed by the Bureau of Archaeological Research. They were formally established in 1972. That's the earliest collections that we have. A lot of this material, as I said, was transferred from Gainesville when they changed from being the State Museum to the Natural History Museum. It's now managed by the Collections and Conservation section within the Bureau of Archaeological Research, and that includes the collections facility as well as our conservation laboratory. And so we have a conservation laboratory specifically actually designed to help us treat some of those objects that have been recovered from Plate Fleet. And so a huge amount of material being brought up in the late 1960s, 1970s, And all that was coming to Tallahassee for being recorded and conserved. And so the museum and the conservation space was set up specifically with that reason in mind. It's important to note this archaeological collection is held in trust for all Floridians. It doesn't belong to Secretary Byrd or Governor DeSantis. It's a public archaeological collection. And part of the reason the collection exists is for stewardship. It's to maintain a collection and to make it available for public access. So we do a lot of exhibit research loans, tours, things like that. So how does the state acquire objects into its collection? So as I said, it's required by law for us to maintain an archaeological collection and to receive material. I like my current job at the Museum of Florida History because we have a collections committee that determines, we kind of talk about what we want and would like to see in the museum. And so we can say no. The Bureau of Archaeological Research can't say no. We have to take in material that's archaeological to be found on state lands and waters. There's no tools about that. So in Florida statute, the title of objects found on state property is given to the Division of Historical Resources and say, hey, you need to look after this and make it available for research and learning. We also take material from the Bureau's archaeologists, so when they're conducting research on state lands and state waters, anything they find will come to the state's archaeological collections. Research permits, so anyone conducting research on state lands, either on submerged or terrestrial sites, also needs to submit artifacts to us for curation. And then also anything that's found looted from state lands. So Fish and Wildlife Commission are able to prosecute people that found looting on state lands, and so when their investigations are complete, the material will come to the Department of State. And then we can also take in private donations too. So because of the limitations in space, we try and assess artifacts based on their provenance and convenience and whether they're unique to the collection and whether they are research and exhibitable, essentially. And so we try and do our best to point people in other directions, other collections, if we can't take those artifacts. Try and get them to the home. And then we also do maintain human remains collections, archaeological collections, primarily from Florida statutes. So when the state archaeologist takes jurisdiction of human remains, they may be housed temporarily with the state before we can get those repatriated. So as you can imagine, this is a very big collection. This has been starting since the 1970s. We think we have about 5 million objects in total from all 67 Florida counties. So it's a great snapshot of Florida's history and archaeology. From 14,000 years ago, from Simpson projectile points, all the way through to like 1970s Star Wars toys. We have a huge, vast collection. So we probably have material from about 600 unique archaeological sites. And it's a very significant collection, and obviously plate fleet is a prominent part of that collection. How do we manage the collection? We utilize the Axial Collections Management System, our digital database. Everything we have is digitized, and so we make sure we track and maintain digital records of every single object we have in the collection. And we do that by object line. So we don't have 5 million lines in the database. We have like a bag of shirts with one object, and that may contain like 20 shirts. And so we make sure we track accession. So when we talk about accession, we're talking about collection. So for example, if we receive material from 75th Fleet Queen's Jewels from the 2025 salvage season, and it's from Anchor Wreck, we will create an accession for Anchor Wreck. And then all those objects will be catalogued within that accession. And so we track using accession object number as well as the Florida Master Site File number, so the unique site number, we help to track that. What this means is that we can quickly search for, so if somebody was contact us and say, can I have a list of artifacts you have from St. Lucie County, we can quickly search for everything we have in St. Lucie County and give you an inventory within 2 minutes. So it's a really good system, it's a really robust system. A lot of states still use paper records, and we're fully digitized, which is fantastic. We're required to maintain an annual inventory of collections. So we do an annual inventory after the 1st of July each year, which is the end of the financial year for the state of Florida. So we take 203 randomly selected records and make sure that we can locate them and correct any issues that may be there. And then we have to do a full inventory of everything that's valued over $1,000. So that includes a lot of plate fleet material we see every year. We catalogue and inventory and then provide a report to the division director to say that everything's interested. As mentioned, we have a state conservation lab. So this is unique to Florida. A lot of states have universities have conservation labs, but not many states have their own fully funded state conservation lab. So this is located in the R.A. Gray building, and we have the ability to treat things from large cannons. We just treated a 25-foot long steamship part that is now on exhibit in Indiana. So we have a huge wet lab, which we have 6 in-ground tanks that we can use to treat wet artifacts. So if you recover an anchor or a cannon from a shipwreck, it would be put in place in the tank, and the kind of rule of conservation: if it's wet, you keep it wet; if it's dry, you keep it dry. And so that's what we do in the wet lab. We keep it wet for treatment. Our dry lab we use mainly to treat objects on terrestrial sources, and so we try and keep the two spaces separate. And we have 3 full-time trained conservators that work year-round on archaeological collections. So you can imagine we have 5 million objects. We need to retreat a lot of those. We continuously receive new artifacts each month, so it's a lot of artifacts to treat. And how do you make sure this material gets out there? So our loan program, we have currently about 79,000 objects on exhibit and research loan across the United States. We do international loans as well, so we have loaned artifacts to Australia and Japan. We may be working on a loan to the UK National Archives in a couple of years as well. And so these are provided free of charge. We just try and tailor the material to the venue to make sure that, and we work from everything from the Smithsonian all the way down to small historical societies. We make sure that we can get artifacts in exhibit cases to see. So this map on this map here is a map of current loans across the state of Florida. So we have material loans to about 101 unique institutions. We also do provide tours of our conservation lab and curation facility as well on request, and we also do produce exhibits and things like that. I'm excited to talk about the future of archaeological collections. So we actually do have a new state-of-the-art facility being constructed that will be completed this year. So this is associated with the current archaeological collection facility, which is located in Mission San Luis, which is in Tallahassee. And so this will be a 2-story facility that will include a public lobby. And so people can go in, there will be a gallery space, as well as a kind of like a public viewing area where you can see curators cataloguing and curating artifacts. So it's kind of like a fishbowl idea. You walk in, you can see people working and cataloguing artifacts and things like that. And we have dedicated storage for human remains collections, oversized collections like cannons and anchors, archival collections. Using a chain hoist too, which would be absolutely fantastic for us to get done. As I said, this has to be done, it's federally funded, so it has to be completed by the end of 2026, and it will be opening sometime in 2027, so please do look out for that announcement when it's announced it's open. And support for this project wouldn't have been possible without the support from the Florida legislation provided the funding for this project. So plate fleet collections. So the state holds collections from 1633, 1715 and 1733 plate fleets. I did a quick deep dive last week on the database to figure out how many objects we actually have from plate fleet. And this isn't an exact complete count, but we have about 30,693 objects in the collection from plate fleet. That includes 1,537 escudos and 16,784 reals. One of the most complete publicly available collection of Spanish colonial currency probably anywhere in the world, I would hazard to guess on that. The majority was obviously recovered through donation under salvage contracts since the late 1960s. And we do have a very obviously strong representational sample of 1715 and 1733 plate fleets. I thought I'd give you a couple of highlights of the kind of collections that we do have. This one's one of my personal interests. So these are 2 fragments of the same olive jar. They were actually recovered from 1733 plate fleet from the LA wreck in about 1974. And so you can see this one on the left has a ram, a cluster of grapes and some eagle claws here. And then this is a double-headed Habsburg eagle. And so this would connect together. This piece is actually on the exhibit at the Melbourne Maritime Museum down in Key West, if you've seen it before. What's interesting about this, though, this is a Habsburg eagle on a 1733 ship. Of what's that got to do with the Bourbon monarchy? It's interesting to think about that kind of material being transported on these vessels, time lag, things like that, just coming to the Spanish colonies. The second object I wanted to show you is this silver rapier blade that was recovered in 2016 by 1715 Queen's Jewels. Obviously fully concrete, as things are from shipwrecks. It arrived in our conservation lab in 2017, and it's like a 2-3 year long process for us to treat these objects. And so through careful conservation work, we were managed to reconstruct the rapier. Now unfortunately, the blade itself is iron, it's completely corroded and gone. But what we did is we actually recreated the blade using a epoxy resin, and then this is actually the wood from the inside of the scabbard that survived. This is absolutely incredible. And then you have obviously you have the blade is still incredibly well preserved. The silver wiring is still there as well. It's just absolutely incredible condition. And this piece will be on exhibit on Friday in the State Capitol building as well, to see as well. And then finally, I just wanted to have a quick chat about the anchor donation. And I don't know, Ben, how much you'd like me to talk about that? Is that...
I'd like you to talk about that.
Of course. Okay. So first of all, I'd like to thank Richard Bellison and the 1715 Fleet Society for what I think is this historic donation to the state of Florida. So in 2021, a significant amount of silver was recovered from Anchor Wreck, thought to be an associated context, maybe a chest or some sort of storage container. And I know that Mr. Salguto and Mike Perner have written a good volume on that chest, and it presents some good kind of like first research into the collection. So this items they were recovered by Mike Perner in July 2021, and so they were donated to the state of Florida in memory of Robert Weller, who was Lieutenant Commander in the United States Navy, and obviously was captain of the Pandion in the cross anchor salvage. So they've dedicated in memory of that. We received these last week, and they're currently being fully catalogued, scheduled for conservation, and then will be available for exhibit research loan. And I'm pleased to say that this donation included an agreement between the state of Florida and 1715 Fleet Society to make sure that a portion of this find is exhibited in the new exhibit when the museum reopens as well. So exciting. And I didn't really want to tread on it like Sal's toes about his research he conducted on these pieces. I just wanted to show everyone these medallions. They're absolutely incredible. And so there are two of them. I'm still not really sure about the function. They have an attachment on the back. They would probably fit into something. But they showcase somebody on a horse trampling a poor fellow underfoot. And this is not unique imagery, especially for the Spanish monarchy at the time. So this piece on the right was made in about 1600 in Mexico and shows the imagery about the Reconquista. And so St. James the Moor Slayer is a continuously repeated motif in Spanish art at the time, showing the conquest, the re-Christianization of Iberia, essentially. And so this imagery is very similar to what you see here, but obviously what is this doing on the 1715 ship? The Reconquista was a long time ago. It's not medieval, this is a post-medieval vessel. And so there's lots of interesting kind of art history I think we can delve into onto these pieces, and this is going to be a long-term research project, and I'm excited to see what people think about this material. But to me, when you see a horseman rearing up like this, kind of the horse braying and then trampling somebody underfoot, you look at images of power, right? I mean, images of power are ubiquitous at the time period. In fact, the Spanish War of Succession, which this image is from the Siege of Tournai in 1709, is one of the first times you start seeing this kind of historical imagery using the idea of historic images of power associated with current historical events. So this one was produced by Wooden in about 1709, just after the Siege of Tournai. Everyone's probably seen this one on the right. This is the famous Napoleon crossing into the Alps by Jacques Davy. Again, you've got this similar kind of imagery here as shown on these pieces. And so I'm sure there's some very interesting kind of archival research you can do into looking at the kind of imagery and use of different landscapes on the slides. That's it for me. So if you have any questions, I'm pretty sure I have to ask. Yes?
2 slides before conservation, please, at the ascension numbers. When the state of Florida receives their division, do they keep the artifact tag number with the artifact?
Yes. So what happens is, what we do is, so when we receive the artifact, they have that tag number. We will give it a new object number, but that tag number will be part of that number.
Cool.
So let's say with the 1750 fleet or the Atocha artifacts that you have, you obviously don't display all of them because you have so much of them. So what do you do with it? Do you ever trade artifacts with other museums?
So
do you sell to other museums to receive? So you could potentially sell 1715 fleet coins and escudos from that or the Atocha to receive other items
So
for the museum.
the state cannot sell artifacts, so we can't sell for a monetary value.
But you can
we do
trade.
have a mechanism to trade. Yeah.
So have you traded anything
In the past, yes. Yeah, the
from
state
the
has.
Atocha or the 1715?
1715, yeah. So 1715, the state has in the past traded artifacts for material. That's definitely something that's been done in the past.
And these trades you're talking about, Are they between museums or in a state trade with an individual?
I think mainly the trades in the past have been done with the salvage contract holders. So I don't think, to my knowledge, we've ever traded with another museum, simply because I don't think there's many museums that hold unique collections of 1715. It's usually the contract holders that have artifacts that they can't acquire for one reason or another. And so that's typically done, that's when the trade is typically done.
Would you trade with a private collector outside of any other states in the United States to say, I'm a wealthy person and I want to donate George Washington's uniform, but I want this in return? Do you do something like that with private
It's
collections?
possible, but we'd have to, that's a legal question, and so we'd have to be, per our Florida statute, we can trade for artifacts, but it's typically only done with a salvage contract holder. And so somebody who has a private collection that's not associated with that contract, we have to make sure that we have like legal clearance to find that private collection.
But it's possible.
It's possible.
I've heard in the past, I've never been to the museum myself, but I've heard in the past that with regards to the treasure fleets, that there's no credit necessarily given in the information placard to the marine artifact recovery specialist, i.e. treasure hunter, that found the item. Is that something you'd be looking into in the future?
Yes, yeah, I think so. Those platelet exhibits were installed in the museum in 1977, and so I haven't seen much of an update now. And so part of that will be reworking a lot of the textiles associated with that. Yeah, so we'll have knowledge of it.
Your last slide, please.
I
The
just
last
have
slide.
one simple question. What's the size of that mounted horseman medallion? Is it 30 millimeters or so, or what is it? Oh, it's a big plate. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question. One of the things that's always been brought up at various meetings and conferences that I've been involved in is that how many silver coins that are unconserved or referred to as greenies does the state actually have? I mean, we hear all kinds of numbers, but do you have an accounting of just how many there are that are still not conserved?
So I think we actually have all the coins we have are conserved, so we don't have any unconserved coins. We do have we have examples of clumps, so coin clumps, because museums sometimes like to see clumps of coins, and so we have a really large one. I think it's over in the 2010s that we have fully treated. So we do treat everything to make sure it goes out and exhibit. So in terms of like unconserved material from Plate Fleet, apart from the material we covered last week, there is nothing that's not been treated.
Well, in 2015, as most of you probably know, it during the 300th anniversary, the Society worked with the state of Florida to create an exhibit that was displayed at the fun show, the Florida United Numismatists Show in Orlando in January of 2024. And they brought the 55.9 pound clump that they had with them. And this was actually, it's the last, I called it the last buffalo, because it's the largest last clump that's still in existence that had never been broken up, and I think it's approaching 1,000 coins.
Yeah, that's about right.
And they had to build a special container to get it down from Tallahassee to Orlando in one piece, because the problem with it is that it's delicate. The coins would fall off if you weren't careful. And they got all the way down there and back without a coin coming off, and they still have it in that container, right to this day. So I thought it was interesting because it's still, I think we have some pictures on the website if you go back far enough of that exhibit. And it really was a great time to see this wonderful items that the state had. Also, I understand that you loan a lot, and you might have mentioned this, I had to step out a minute, but you might have mentioned that the state does have other museums in Florida that they have loaned to. Did you bring that up?
Yes, I did, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Because I've been to several, and they have material that's on loan from that. All right.
Very good.
Any more questions? Yes, sir.
So the museum has so many coins that really many are repeat. Would you ever consider selling some to raise funds or something like
So
that?
yeah, we cannot sell artifacts to raise funds, so unfortunately no. So we wouldn't be able to do that.
One last question. So, since you have so many Cubs and Scudos, I'm not a diver, so why keep taking it in if you have so much of it, which just put it on the shelf and lock it up and that's it? I mean, I'm kind of curious as to why you would keep taking in something you already have instead of giving it back to the people that actually put money for it yourself.
So those figures there are highly inflated because of the really early days of the 1715 plate fleet. And so these figures are highly conflated because of the early days of the plate fleet. So in the early 1970s, the way that the salvage divisions with the state were done is that they would give the state like 2 bags of coins, unconserved coins, and then they would take the rest of them in terms of the division that the state does with the contract holders at the time. And so a lot of what we have is from the 1970s and 1980s. And so it's from that time period where there wasn't a kind of a set system in place, rather than just 2 bags for the state and then X number of bags being retained by the salvage contract. And so that number is not like a representative sample of the state taking material, it's just what was given as a random sample. And so that's why we have so much. Nowadays, we do not select like coins that we already have examples of. We do not do that.
And I can attest to that. I mean, we talked about it the other day. Just because we have that 20% donation, it doesn't always mean that Florida will request 20% of any given rec site. There's some rules in place.
Yeah, so that unique artifacts. So anything that's not currently represented in the state collection, that is for coins as well. So we won't, but if we have an Scudo from Lima from a certain date, we can't request it. Yes, sir.
Just as a comment, we have a replica of the gold tray at the museum, and we've been doing recently a lot of research on it and have come up with some really interesting information that I don't believe the state has, nor is it in Alex's book, but it's something that there's a group of us working on, including Sal and Mike and a couple of volunteers from the museum.
Yeah.
And also, I was there Tuesday when you got the bottle, that Tavia bottle, and in all candor, that's an extremely interesting and rare bottle. I gave some of your people some information, but I think that bottle is worth pursuing and doing more research and information, because I've seen ones that date back to 1907 AD. So it is a rare bottle, and I believe that Mike tells me I'm wrong. I think it's the only one off the 1715 fleet. So it looks like a rather obscure, just a little dumb bottle, but really is quite valuable and goes way back historically.
That's good to know. And yet, if you could send me any information you have on the glove tray, that would be fantastic as well.
Would love to do that.
So yeah, we the last interpretation we have is this is a Mansarina, so it's part of a cocoa serving set, because we had at the time it was on exhibit at the Museum of Florida History in 2014, 2015. We had a curator from the Spanish National Museum having a tour. He looked at that and said, to him that was a Mansarina as part of a chocolate serving set, a cocoa set.
It's not. I can guarantee you it's not.
What do you believe it is?
Well, my background is Chinese export porcelain. The form is called a taza, something that goes back hundreds of years in China. There are over 100 Chinese in Mexico City, and they had to be involved in this design because it's not something common to anything done in the Americas. The flowers there are sunflowers, and the sunflowers are indigenous to the Indians in South America, and we've done quite a bit of research on that. Sunflowers went to Europe, to Spain, they came back to the Americas. The reposé, the way that it's constructed, the model that we have is not got the underside. You obviously have the original, but the metalwork there is typical, I think, of what some of the artisans would have done, either Mexican, Spanish, or I'm being told now it could have been made in Lima. I don't know. It needs more research, but I call it a presentation tray. It is absolutely not a glove tray.
Yeah, no, we don't. Yeah, we think it's a called cocoa set as well.
Yeah. In fact, the 2 glove trays were just sold by Sotheby's that belonged to King Philip V, and absolutely not a glove tray, which was the original thought process for many years. So.
Richardson.
I have a question. It goes back to our 2015 conference. We had a lady from the state that was there. I forget her name, forgive me, but she had some remarkable news at the time. 3D photogrammetry was really getting big at the time. She showed a number of the scans that they had of different historic shipwreck objects. And she'd mentioned that there was a program getting instituted, or the plan is at the time, to do the 3D scans and have these files, STLs or whatever, available eventually so they can go out and museums could 3D print them, faux paint them, do whatever, make a replica. So you could have an item that will never leave the Tallahassee archives, could be out in the public, at least where they can visually see it in a case, and make a note that it's a reproduction. But that was the idea, to be able to get a program going with that. So it took me 10 years. I finally got a huge 3D printer. Man, I'm going to do this. So I volunteered at different museums, thinking, hey, I like it. I went to it's still the same scans that were there 10 years ago, but maybe I don't know where to go or how to go. So I'd love to learn more, and if there's a way of downloading and doing that. I have skill sets to put these together and do that. I think it's just a great idea. I'm still excited about it 10 and a half years later. But do you have any information? Is that still in the works, or?
So those scans I think you're probably referring to were launched on our website, at floridahistory3d.com, around the same time.
Okay.
And
right.
so this is it's a computer assisted network.
I think we have internet there.
Ben, that's the presentation we'll do tomorrow. The one that was just up there.
Yeah, so hopefully this website loads. So yeah, we do those 3D models I think that were mentioned at the conference in 2015. We're hosting online as part of a digital exhibit on Spanish plate fleet wrecks. And we have continuously produced 3D models of artifacts.
You have? Okay.
And they're available on Sketchfab, and I can send you the link.
Oh, okay.
So we post them on social media, on Facebook and things like that. We haven't produced many recently, but over the past 10 years we've produced more than you would see.
Well,
I can send you the actual model files, and you're welcome.
Oh, I
to
love
print.
that. Wow.
Yeah, that for educational purposes.
Yes, that's fine. And I do talks too. It'd be nice to have certain items out
Yeah,
with me
people
when
can
I do the
handle
talks.
things like that, which I think is
would be-
fantastic. So that's one of the reasons why we designed this website, is for people that can't access a museum or come and see the collection, that they can access it from the comfort of their own home.
And the tray that you were just speaking of, I know they did a 3D scan of that and provided that to Alex, or provided replicas of that, But the file of that alone would just be awesome, Yeah, okay, thank you.
Don't start selling them on eBay, Jim.
No, for educational use only.
Yeah, hopefully this loads and we can.
Didn't get a COA or something.
Right.
Does anyone else have any questions while I wait for the? Yes, sir.
The requirement to check the inventory status of every object over $1,000 when you have 5 million objects and inflation taking place seems to me to be extraordinarily onerous. Is that true?
As a state employee, I will say we enjoy doing the inventory every year. So it is. So what we do is, in fact, everything that's located in our secure, what we call the vault, so our secure off-site storage location, we do 100% inventory of that, regardless of the value. So anything that's in that space, we do 100% inventory every year. So it's about 28,000 objects. We make sure we have hands-on, and the process for that is you will have, it's organized by the supervisor of the Collections and Conservation Program, it used to be me, and then you have an external person that they don't supervise to make sure it's the independent auditor, and so that everything's checked off, double-checked to make sure it's present. And so we do that irregardless of the value. So we're covering everything at that time anyway. So irregardless if that financial amount changes, we're still doing the same amount of work essentially.
Has anything ever turned up missing?
During the audits, So anything that's within that vault space is never, touch wood, has never turned up missing. Now, for the other larger inventory, we do that random sample at like 230 things. We have at times noticed issues, and that's because we're opening boxes of material that hasn't been looked at since the 1970s, and so our inventory record could be a little bit different. And so we have to change things. So it may be like a data entry issue or something like that. But in terms of not being able to physically find an artifact, since I've been there, we haven't had that issue. Thankfully. Yes, sir.
In 1982, when you lost the Supreme Court case with Treasure Salvers, and you had to restore the inventory to Treasure Salvers, there was $1 million of treasure that was missing from the inventory. Has that ever been recovered?
I'm not familiar with that, about a large material being missing.
It was front page of the newspapers throughout Florida. I can't remember what month, but in
1982, 1983, something like that. Yes, ma'am.
I may have missed it, but how much lead time and how do we schedule to come look at this stuff, these stuff?
So it would be good to give us as much notification as possible, just so that we can prepare for the size of the tour and things like that.
Did you have your email, or do we go through the webpage, or how?
You can go through the webpage, and then there's also the webpage just has our general email address, and you can contact me, somebody will contact you back.
And do we need to be real specific? In other words, I know you have a collection of 17, 15 plates, but do we need to be specific with items we want to look at?
No, I mean, you certainly can be, and we can make sure we have those available for you. And especially if you wanted to do it as like 1750 Fleet Society, and you wanted to bring several members up, that's not a problem at all either. And then we can make a day of it, why not? Any more questions? Okay, but this is what Jim was talking about in terms of 3D models. So you can see that you can digitally manipulate this, and then we have set subject points that will discuss the actual portions of the object. So in terms of the damage, the fact that it's a concretion and it's actually part of a cast that we're doing in our conservation lab. And so it's available for several artifacts on the 1715 plate fleet. And then, as I said, we also have a sketchfab account which we use for social media.
One more question. So all the donations from the salvagers, do you have a record of what came from the salvager?
Yes. Yeah.
Is that available online too?
It's not available online, but it's something that we can search in our database for you. Yes.
So large objects, say, as canon, once they've been through the conservation process, how does the state manage those to be distributed to the public parks
Yeah, so usually for things like cannons and anchors, the final conservation process that we do is we apply an epoxy paint on its surface so they can be exhibited outdoors. So a lot of state parks, the city of Tallahassee as well, they have cannons on exhibit outside. And so the majority of cannons that we have, in fact, I think all the plate fleet ones, if I'm remembering correctly, are all on exhibit. And mainly in state parks outdoors. So it's the same thing for anchors as well. Okay, well, there's no more questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.